Good afternoon. Let's try it again. Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Jane Laudermilk, and I'm a member of the Quilt Ministry team here at Mount Olive. And we're blessed you have chosen to join us today to view a presentation of the Last Supper quilt panel that's displayed here in our sanctuary, and to hear a little bit about our global quilt ministry and our local quilt ministry. Here in the sanctuary, on this side, we have bed quilts that have been made for homeless women, Horizon House, that's going to be opening up an apartment complex next year, and we are making quilts for them. Those are all double bed sizes. In this area in here are our mission quilts, and over in this section over here are our comfort quilts that we make for people of the congregation that are suffering from terminal illnesses. So that's just some of the quilt ministry that we do, plus our beautiful Lord's Supper panel that we have. We all have time, talents, and treasures that we can share with ourselves and with other people to help bring us joy in our lives. So part of our purpose today is to maybe encourage you to see where you can use your time, talents, and skills to broaden in your particular sphere of influence within your community. First of all, I'd like to get an idea of where everybody is from, trying to find out how far north and south. And I know we have somebody here from Ohio. Anybody else from out of state? Okay, we have someone near Akron, so that's pretty much high. Hold your hand. I didn't see where you were. No. Edna, where are you? Then what are we doing? Anybody, how far south? Is anybody here from Franklin? Hold up your hand. What about Columbus? Seymour? Anybody farther south than that? Anybody from down around the Louisville area? Okay. From where are you from? Jasper. Okay. Now let's do east and west. We got anybody from Greenfield? Lawrence? Anybody that side of Indianapolis? Okay, Brownsburg. We got Brownsburg to the west. Whiteland? Okay. So we a large area there. So perhaps when we're milling around later on, if you want to find some other like-minded people in your area, that you can share what you're doing and maybe get involved with some other people. That's part of what our purpose is just to kind of share what we love to do with as many people as we can. I know we've got people here from some different organizations. How many of you are involved in a quilt guild? Okay, Franklin Quilt Guild? Nimble Thimbles. Greenwood Quilt Guild? You here? Indianapolis? What's some of the other quilt guilds that are around? Columbus? Okay. Sewing guilds. Got any from the American Sewing Guild? And Embroidery Guild. I know I see some of my stitching friends here. Okay. And there's also several other sorority and volunteer organizations that will make pillowcases or different types of things. Do we have anybody involved in any of those type of activities? And how many of you would like to find a group to get involved with? Maybe that's what we could do, and then people could hover over you and share what they're doing in their particular little sphere of influence to get you involved with that. And how did you hear about this event? How many saw it in the newspaper? Maybe your guild let you know about it? Social media? Well, the age that we are, there's not a lot of it saw us from social media, but that's okay. It's out there for the ones that might hear about it. And did any of you have a friend that invited you? We all need friends to invite us to share things with it, don't you? Yeah. Well, what? What about a wife made you come? Okay. I have seen several out there. I know my husband and son are someplace out there, I think, are in that particular category, but it's nice to kind of understand maybe some of their jargon. Maybe that's what will help you today, is understand jargon that they're talking about. Okay. So we've had a welcome, and now I'm going to introduce Janine Owens, and she's going to talk a little bit about the history of our quilting mission here at Mount Olive.
Good afternoon. I almost said good morning because I'm usually up here speaking on a Sunday morning, but good afternoon. I'm so thrilled to see how many people came out to see our quilt today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our history of quilting at Mount Olive. My name is Janine Owen. I have been a charter member of our church, and I also am the office administrator, so I work in the office Monday through Thursday. And our quilting history is very long. So in 1999, this part of the building opened, and we were super excited to have a building to have worship in instead of a school building. But the most exciting part was then we could also do other things, like have Bible studies and have fellowship events and have a building to do that in. One of the very first fellowship events we had was a ladies' day where you could come and do a Bible study, and then you had opportunity to take one of several classes, one of which was led by our member Karen Davis, and she was doing an introduction to quilting. And so several of us took this introduction to quilting class, and that was the beginning of our quilt addiction, because then we said, hey, we want to learn more about this. Could we have another class? And so once a month we met, and she would teach us a new skill. We'd go home, work on that. We'd come back a month later, teach us a new skill. So we all got pretty proficient. And that monthly meeting kind of kept going on for several years, where we would just come and share what we're working on, share tips and tricks and patterns, because that's what quilters do. And then when it kind of changed from just being a community of quilters that like to get together and share, Pastor Jeff came to us after he went to India the first time in 2013. And he said, ladies, would any of you like to make some quilts that I could take to India with me in 2015 when we go again on our next mission trip? So we're like, okay. So we made some, not a ton, but we made some. He took some pictures and he brought them back and showed us of people receiving the quilts, and we went, oh boy, I think we need to make more. And that is when our mindset changed from being a community to being a ministry. So that year we made, for him to go in 2017, we had two members of our church, one of which was Karen Davis, who taught us all the beginnings, and we wanted to send even more quilts. We sent 118 quilts to India that year. And then we decided, if we're going to keep making these many quilts, instead of meeting monthly, couldn't we meet every week? And so we started coming on Tuesdays. A lot of the ladies were retired, and at first was in the afternoon, and then it was kind of all day. And then we took over a classroom, and then we got sewing machines that were donated and some that we purchased, and we set up a whole sewing room. So if you're a quilter or a sewer, you know, dragging your machine from home back and forth, it just gets old. So we just have a room with sewing machines in it full time. We have cutting tables that were donated to us. We have a design wall in there, and that is where all the magic happens. So we even got the little labels created to put on all the quilts that we make. And if you look on the quilts that are in front of you, somewhere on there, there is a label. We have them on our name tags. It has our church symbol and a little note on the back so people know where they came from. So another big thing that happened was Heather Alexander, one of our members of our quilting team and Pastor Jeff's wife, got a long arm machine. And so she started doing all the long arm quilting for every quilt in here. She has long armed, and she donates that time and donates her stitching to our quilting ministry. So that helped make it go a little faster, because we used to tie them all. So that made it go a lot faster. By 2019, when we went, we sent 124 quilts to India. Then 2020 happened. Well, all of a sudden, we couldn't gather anymore on Tuesdays. We're like, what are we going to do? Everyone's at home, and we couldn't be together. So we got creative. Since I work here, I'd go back in the sewing room. I would get 3 yards of material, three different materials, a pattern, put it in a bag, set it outside the door The ladies would come by, pick up a quilt, drop off when they finished. I would send it to Heather, home with Jeff, and we just kept making quilts and making quilts and making quilts. Then we couldn't send anyone to India for a while, and we had a bumper crop of quilts. So we even found local ministries where we could donate those quilts to here. We had a big fundraiser sale and raised money for 52 sewing machines for India. So we still got creative in how we could help people with the quilts that we had. We expanded our ministry into making comfort quilts for members of our congregation and their family who were going through either terminal illness or cancer treatment or had some sort of tragedy, accident, long-term recovery type situations. And we started making comfort quilts that we would give to those members and expanded our ministry beyond just making quilts for India. And we do comfort quilts too. And that is a really moving experience. In fact, if you would indulge me, I'm going to read you the last comfort quilt that we sent. I just got a note from. So we sent a comfort quilt to the sister in Michigan of Pastor Art, who has done a lot of ministry for us here at Mount Olive. And his wife, Joy, sent this. His sister passed away shortly after receiving the quilt from us. It was an aggressive form of cancer that they weren't expecting. And Joy sent a note that said, Janine, I want to let you and the Mount Olive ladies know that the prayer quilt that you made for Art's sister was used as a pall on her casket. It was a very emotional time for me, knowing where it came from and the love that went into creating it. Thank you for demonstrating the love of Jesus through your time and skills in making it. We were all so deeply moved. And that right there is why we keep making them. So lastly, I know Jane talked about it, that the quilts you have over here are going to the Horizon House. The quilts here are going to the mission trip the next mission trip to India. And these actually are not all of the quilts that we have ready to go. They were just the ones we put out, and then comfort quilts. And we also kind of moved into making some quilts that we use to adorn the sanctuary. And there's some examples of that in the hallway that you'll see as you go out to enjoy the reception afterwards. So right now, I'd like to tell you that we have so far sent 412 quilts to India. We have distributed 115 comfort quilts, which included sending quilts to Fort Myers after the hurricane and Sullivan County after the tornado. And we have distributed 136 quilts to local charities here in the Indianapolis area since about 2015. So, and that is while we were creating that piece of art as well. So they weren't only working on that, we were also creating quilts. I'm going to turn it over now to Pastor Jeff, who's going to talk a little bit more about that relationship we have with the Calvary India Mission, where we send quilts.
Thank you. Thank you, Janine. It is wonderful to see all of you here today. Thank you so much for coming to this special presentation. Thank you, Jane and Janine, for leading us off. Janine has gotten to see the impact in India, and I'm so glad you shared that thank you note. You'll see some thank you notes that have been written by people who received those comfort quilts. They're hanging, many of them, on the wall down the hallway when you go look at the different displays today, but I feel like that keeps things going as a reminder to us that this is about sharing God's love in a very tangible way with people. As Janine mentioned, when I first went to India on a mission trip in 2013, and we distributed some quilts that we had, and I saw the joy that it brought, I thought, this is a great way for those who may never be able to go to the other side of the planet to still touch people on the other side of the planet with their time and their talents. And so when we started distributing these quilts, I was amazed by the attraction in these communities. We can go into rural villages of India and utilizing local churches and pastors that will know of people both within their congregation and in the larger community who would benefit from having a quilt. And it's so funny to watch what they call the aunties of the community line up to receive their quilts. And you'll have a stack of quilts ready to go, and I'll see in every group that without a fail, there will be one or two of them that starts to count in their head which quilt is in the stack and where they need to be in the line to get that precise one. I mean, they're smart, and so they have an eye for quality. They know what they're looking for. And they're very, very proud of those quilts once they go home with them, to display them and to utilize them. I love the fact that the time and talents that are within our church are used to bless our worship space. And so one thing, as a liturgical church that follows the church year, you see the different colors that are on our pulpit and on our altar. And so matching the themes of the church year have come out a lot of different quilts that then are displayed in our sanctuary. And so when the idea came forward to put together a massive quilt relating to the Last Supper, capturing the imagery in Da Vinci's piece, I thought, what an amazing idea. But I don't think I fully grasped in my mind the impact that would be had until I saw it for myself. And so it is a built-in object lesson each and every Sunday. And it's always amazing when someone sees it for the first time. I'll be preaching, and people start to let their eyes wander a bit, and then all of a sudden you see this. You know, it's kind of a reaction, a little whiplash, and so people bend their necks to see that. But if they're going to be distracted in a sermon, I can't think of something that is more suitable distraction than a picture of Jesus. And so I'm thankful for that. And we have a short film that we like to share with you today. This has been produced by my son, Nathan Alexander, and his company, NA Films. And I hope it helps you to understand the symbolism of this Last Supper quilt. All right, we can help out getting that video restarted.
It was
Let's
designed
restart it,
by
please.
members of our Quilt ministry. I'm Jeff Alexander, pastor of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Greenwood, Indiana, and I welcome you to this presentation on the Last Supper quilt. It was designed by members of our Quilt ministry team here at Mount Olive as a way to display the powerful imagery contained in Da Vinci's Last Supper, one of the most famous, familiar examples of Christian art known to mankind. Leonardo da Vinci created this Last Supper painting between the years 1495 and 1498. A masterpiece of the Italian High Renaissance period, one of the best-known works of religious art. This piece illustrates the scene from the last days of Jesus Christ, as described particularly in the Gospel of John the Apostle. In John chapter 13, verse 21, when Jesus gathered with his 12 apostles at the Last Supper during Passover week, Jesus declared that one of his own 12 would betray him. "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me," Jesus said. When Da Vinci painted the Last Supper, he sought to depict the reaction of the different disciples as they heard this news. I believe that he actually did more than just showing their reaction to the word that one of them would betray him. He also sought to capture the emotions and the unique person that is behind each of the 12 disciples. Although on the surface it looks like a straightforward piece of biblical art, it's an exceptionally complex work. There's symbolism, there's complexity, there's use of perspective and dramatic focus. The picture stands 15 by 29 feet, and the original occupies an end wall in the dining hall of a convent in Milan, Italy. Our quilt is not that big, but it certainly is a massive, as you can see, display here in our sanctuary at Mount Olive Lutheran Church. Over a period of more than 2 years, this quilt was made with 47,752 squares of fabric. Measuring 5 by 16 feet, it hangs high above our worship space, reminding us of the one who is at the center of all that we do, the Lord Jesus. Some of the symbolism contained in this painting, and of course in our quilt, I'd like to highlight for you today. First of all, notice the groupings of 3. There's a lot of symbolism there, and typically in Christian art, the grouping of 3 things together symbolizes the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We see that the 12 disciples are actually grouped in 4 groups of 3 disciples each. And when you look at the Christ at the center of the table, you see the lines. He's in a triangular position. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God in the flesh. And then behind Jesus, we see the three windows, also symbolic of the triune God, very present when Jesus is conducting his ministry among his disciples. Truly, I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. So look with me at the Last Supper from the left to the right. Depicted are the following disciples. First, Bartholomew, aka Nathaniel. Then James the Less, and then Andrew. In the second group of three, we see Judas Iscariot. Next to him is Peter, and then closest to Jesus is John, the son of Zebedee, the beloved apostle. On the other side of Jesus, we see Thomas, James, the brother of John, also a son of Zebedee, and Philip. And in the final group of three, we see Matthew, the tax collector, and Thaddeus, aka Judas, not Iscariot, and finally at the end of the table is Simon the Zealot. When I think about the Gospel of John and what we learn about the different apostles, it's easy to see what Da Vinci was trying to capture in the motions, the facial expressions, and the lighting that you see on each of these figures. For example, if we look over to the first group of three, the third disciple from the left is Andrew. Andrew is known in the Gospels as the one who is always ready to put his hands to work, ready to bring things and people to Jesus. Here Andrew's hands are raised up with a look of surprise. But I also think of Andrew, the brother of Peter, who himself used his hands and his influence to bring his brother Peter to know Jesus. Speaking of Peter, we see him looking sharp, gripping a knife in his hand, ready to pounce and fight and go after the one who would dare to betray the Lord. Then, of course, a lot of attention over the years has been given to John, the beloved disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. His look conveys warmth and love. He is swooning at the words of Jesus. And in John 13, we know that Peter was leaning into John, and we can hear Peter say to him, "Hey, John, ask Jesus which one he means." If you look to the other side of Jesus again, I see Thomas, who's angry, but his finger is pointed up, quizzically ready to ask a question, thoughtfully thinking what this must mean. An epiphany, an aha moment. But Jesus, Thomas with that one finger, would later touch the risen Jesus and see for himself that Jesus is Lord and Jesus is God. Down the table a bit, we see Matthew, once a tax collector and always going to be calculating in his personality, trying to piece it all together and turning to the elderly Simon the Zealot at the table's end to seek the wisdom of another and perhaps explanation from another more seasoned member of the 12. And yes, how can we not but consider Judas? Judas, who is lower than the other 12 disciples, showing that he, by his own choosing, will separate himself not only from the disciples, but from the Lord who he betrays. With the price of 30 silver coins, which we can see Judas grasping a bag of coins in his hand, he is a thief, and as the treasurer of the apostles, he oftentimes took a little bit for himself. He cheated. Well, he wasn't even worth his salt. If you look closely, you can see that there is a salt jar that's been knocked over in front of Judas Iscariot. He is the betrayer. He's lower in position than the others, and he's the only one of the 12 disciples whose face remains darkened, and by his own choosing is not illuminated by the light of Christ. I invite you to consider the symbolism contained in this beautiful piece, the Last Supper. When I think about the work that Da Vinci put into this piece, I think about the energy that he put forth to show the story to tell the story in a very vivid way. And I'm also thankful that many, many years later, ladies at Mount Olive Lutheran Church decided to do the same, to tell the story of Jesus, to work with their talents and abilities to convey this meaningful display of the Lord working among His people. As the lines in this painting and the lines in this quilt all point back to Jesus, it reminds us that He is the center and the core of everything that we do. He's the purpose of our ministry at Mount Olive Lutheran Church and the purpose of the quilt ministry as we seek to give glory to the Lord Jesus Christ by serving people in His name and through the blessing of quilts, convey His love and His mercy to many other people.
Now I would like to go through the process that we went through and the decisions that we made when we did the Last Supper panel quilt. Early 2000, during a visit to a quilt store in Shipshewana, Indiana, Linda and Deanna, a couple of our quilt team members, saw a wall hanging of the Lord's Supper. They didn't think it was quite the size that this was, but it was something that it made an impression with them that at that time they thought, I would like to see if we could do that someday for our church. Well, they searched and they finally found a full coverage cross-stitch pattern by Janlin called the Last Supper, and they purchased it. This was in 2000. So this was the pattern that they purchased. Has, it's a full coverage cross-stitch pattern with it. During late 2020, Linda presented to the Mount Olive Quilt Ministry Group an opportunity to join her in creating a panel, the Lord's Supper, for display in the church based upon the counted cross-stitch pattern. Without any idea of how we were going to do it, what we were going to do it, they say, we've got this, we'd like to see it positioned someplace in our sanctuary. Would you join with us? So we started looking at what some of the options were. We found a website that is thesupper.net. That was a gentleman by the name of Don Locke that had created it as a quilt wall hanging. His quilt has been displayed in over 37 states, primarily in Texas, which I think he is from. Also, in his website, it says that it was displayed at Quilt America in Indianapolis in July of 2000. How many of you were at that quilt festival in 2000? I remember being there. I don't remember seeing the quilt there, but it was there. It was displayed there. Well, we decided that we were going to create the panel using fabric colors corresponding to the DMC colors in the pattern. He had used and created a lot of hand-dyed fabric for his particular one. I think we wanted to get started and get going, and we weren't concerned about exact color matching. We were just going to use the DMC colors. So we selected the 52 DMC colors. We picked out a skein of each of those as a selection to try to match fabric that we had. Now, neither Janine or Pastor Jeff has mentioned that all the quilts that you see here and the majority of the fabric in that has all been donated to us. Even though we love to quilt, we don't do a lot of shopping for fabric. It's all been donated to us. So when you look at the scope of that, we've had a lot of fabric that's gone through our quilt ministry. We took these 52 DMC colors and we went to our closet and we saw if we had matches of things that would match the DMC colors. And I'd say for about 90% we were able to find matches with fabric that we already had. Now, some of them were solid, although, and I think in the video that we saw, a lot of those fabrics are not solid, but they kind of looked like that DMC color, so that's how we selected them. The ones that we didn't have is we hadn't had anybody that makes quilts that uses a lot of flesh-colored fabric. That's just kind of not what we do, right? So we had to purchase the flesh-colored fabric. We also purchased the fabric that's in the tablecloth, because that's a lot of fabric that it used for that. But majority of what you're seeing up there, about 90% of what you're seeing up there has been donated fabric. Some of it, quite truthfully, was ugly, but put together by other ugly fabrics. it presents the picture and the colors that we saw that were in the cross-stitch pattern. Then we decided what size was it going to be. Well, we looked at doing it, even before we selected fabrics, we looked at just making a big cross-stitch piece, but that was going to be too big and too many ply, and that didn't sound like fun, so we decided we would use it with fabric. We decided on a 1/2 inch finished square, made it the size that it is now. Now, it would have been easier if we would have made larger squares, but where would we have put it? We'd have had to put additional wall space with it. And we didn't really look at that to say what size do we need to do. We looked and saw what size it was. We came in here and we said, well, it'll probably fit with that size. So now we've decided on the size of our finished squares was going to be a 1/2 inch. So to do that, we used a 1-inch gridded fusible interfacing. We did not sew 1/2 inch squares together like you would in a typical quilt. We used the gridded interfacing technique, which gave it the backing that we needed to give it some substance, and it also made it fairly easy for us to determine where each of the colors needed to go. So the fabric would need to be cut into 1-inch squares. We used a Studio AccuQuilt die cutting machine with a die that would cut 20 squares at a time. So we cut those, and we made file folders that we put the squares in a plastic bag with them. And you can see these in our demonstration that we have in the other room with what they were. Had no idea when we started, had no clue as to how many, if any, squares we'd need. We did not spend time counting the colors and seeing we need how many squares of each things. We just started out by cutting about 81-inch squares of each of the colors, put them in a bag, put them in the thing, and then we started down this road, not knowing for sure what we'd really need. And for some of the ones, especially with some of the blues and the greens, we ran out of the fabric that we had in our closet, and we would then have to find another color. But I don't think you can see if the above the tablecloth is blue, that the bottom of the tablecloth is a different color of blue. We tried to match as well we could, but some of them were, and just like when you're doing a cross-stitch thing and you have to use a different dye lot, you kind of blend the things in with it. So we had to do that for some of them. And as we were putting the quilt together, if we ran out of the 80 squares that we started out with, then we'd go over to the AccuCut quilting machine and we'd cut another bunch and put it in there and work on it from that section. We started by, right in the middle was Jesus' face, which was a good place to start. So we had one group that started in the middle top and went to the right, another group that started in the middle top and went to the left. The size of this quilt is we used this interfacing grid, and let me show you the size of each of the sections that we did. So it was 46 inches that way. We didn't do anything in the top square and the bottom square, so we had 44 squares here. And then like on a ironing board cover, or we had some square ironing board surfaces that we'd use, could do 17 across. So each of those was done in 17 by 44 inch sections. So when we started out, probably for the first month or two, we had no clue what we were doing. It just looked like it was scrambled fabric just put there. It didn't really look like much of anything. I think Pastor Jeff would come in sometime and kind of roll his eyes, say, is this really going to look like something? But we kept working on it. We had one group that went to the right and one went to the left. Also, there are 3 segments. Like there was the first segment is the top. That were 2 big panels, then 2 big panels for the middle section, and then 2 big panels for the bottom section. So there was really 6 sections that we made it in separately, that then we sewed those together to get the finished piece. When we started placing the squares on the interfacing, we started out with a group of 2 people doing it, and we had, at that time, thanks to 2021, and we couldn't have any people in the church, we got a dedicated room. So not only do we have a sewing room, but we had a dedicated room where we built the quilt in, which that was nice. We could leave the things out from week to week and not have to remember where we were when we came back. It was very nice that we had that. So on a two-person team, one person would look at the chart. You know, they would have to look at the chart. And for those of you that have done cross-stitch, you know what I'm talking about. You'd look at the chart, and there's a little symbol there that told you what it's supposed to be. Well, then you had to look at another piece of paper that told you what DMC color that was. And then we had to go to our folders to pull out that fabric to find what it was. So it was a huge learning curve at the very beginning to know what the numbers were, what the colors were, and how to get all of that put together. So with two people working, one would go through and match the symbol, get the number, and then the other person would be there by the squares, and it sounded like bingo was going on. It would be 420 for 3, 822 for 2, 310 for 7. So that was the way they would communicate each other to build each row horizontally. So after all 17 squares were built horizontally, then we would use an iron to press each of those down to hold them in place and then go to the next one. Now, in some of the sections where there's large, like if you look above Jesus' head in that blue area, a lot of that's the same color of blue. So we would build that as a block as opposed to an individual row. But for the most part, where there were lots of different colors, they were built as 17 across. So I think you could see as we were doing this, we had no clue what it was going to look like. We were just looking at that small section of it. There are a lot of half-square triangles in this, and for the half-square triangles, we decided just to cut the squares in half and put the two down. We didn't sew them together. We glued them down together to take care of that part of building the piece where there were the half-square triangles. And after we would get one of these sections completed, then we would move to the next section. And we bought rolls of this, so we had a large roll. It wasn't something we had to fold out. It was a roll that we had. It was just keep rolling through to go to the next empty section for both sides that were being worked on for that time. When all of the fabric was on one of that section, on the top two sections, when it was all in place, then at that point in time, one of the members started to doing the sewing. So when you do something with this particular technique, sewed all of the horizontal rows first in each section, then pressed, and then sewed the vertical rows. So it ended up having a half-inch square. When we started sewing with it for the first little while, we would check each time we would sew a seam to make sure we were doing the half-inch. We had the half-inch section that we needed to, but once we kind of learned the sewing machine that we were using, how to sew with it, that we didn't have to spend a lot of time doing that. And I think as Janine mentioned, we have the kind of the low-end line Brother sewing machine that have been workhorses for us in our quilt ministry here. They're lightweight, they're easy to carry from room to room, and they are workhorses and sew lots. So you don't have to spend a lot of money to get a expensive sewing machine to do the work that we did with this. We also chose to use 60-weight thread so that we minimized the bulk that was going to be in each of those seams, just like if you're making a miniature quilt. Because with half-inch squares, you're basically talking about a miniature quilt. So once we got the top section, which was like the top third of it all done, and we sewed those two panels together, then we looked at it and we said, well, at this point in time, I don't think we're going to end up making a quilt because you had 6 inches of fabric every place because you had the interfacing and then you had the fabric with the way the seams were there. So behind all of that is just 6 layers of fabric each place, and we decided probably would not. Don't think Heather wanted to stitch through all those different things on the quilting machine. And we thought it was going to hold its shape well enough that it really didn't need to be quilted for that. So we made that decision. Also at that point in time, we now at least we had the faces done. And if we got far enough away from them, they actually looked like faces, which was an encouragement for us to continue. We even brought in a ladder one day, stood on the ladder and used our cell phone to take a picture of it. And at that point in time, they really did look like faces. We were getting far enough away that you could really see that that's what it was looking like. So now we were encouraged to get on to the next section because we had 4 more sections we had to go to. One of our members kept us in bobbins, filled all the time. Another one of the ladies did all of the pressing. When we did the seams, we did not, if any of you have done a gridded thing, you know you usually clip each seam and you fold half of them and win half the other. Well, some of us didn't think cutting 60,000 little snips was going to be much fun, so we just pressed them all one direction, sewed them and did the other, and I think it turned out well, you know, and you're not going to be looking close to see that your seams don't all match that way. So that made it easier that way. But we had a dedicated bobbin doer and a dedicated presser, which helped make those of us that were actually doing it on the grid get the work done as soon as we could. When I started sewing, had all this bulk. I mean, you've got a lot of, any of you that have worked in big things, you know you've got a lot of bulk. Set up in the kitchen, which you can see when you go to see some of the other areas in the church, one of the sewing machines there on the kitchen counter. It's got a big counter, slick, so things slide over it, pulled out one of the drawers, and was able to get a lot of that sewing done. For people that wanted to stand, for people that wanted to sit, we set up a couple of tables next to each other so it would have the weight of it so things weren't pulled over for it to get the sewing done. At some point in time, I think before we even were all through getting all the pieces ironed on, we looked at it and we knew we needed to decide how we were going to handle all the back stitching that was mentioned in the cross stitch pattern. So we tried a couple of different things, but what we ended up doing was just using a black magic marker where the back stitches were. And I think if you look, and in the pictures that we saw in Pastor Jeff's video, the hands, the eyes, the feet, they needed that to give them the definition. And I think that's just black magic marker that we used that really helped define that. It took a lot of time to do it, but I think it looked really well. There was some braid that was added to the tablecloth to give it a little sparkle, and just kind of the way it all looks, you know, like it's got the folds in it and everything, was just with the way that the color placement was, that I think has really enhanced it and makes it look more like it as actually a painting. So now we've got all the fabric onto the gridded interfacing, we've got all the seams sewn, and we've got the 6 pieces sewn together. So now what do we do? Well, we looked at it, and at that point in time, we thought, well, maybe we should do a border. That's when we got to go buy some fabric because we didn't have enough border to go all the way around this. And it's can't see it real clear here, but it's a wood grain fabric that I think made a real nice border all the way around it. And then for those of you that have ever done large quilts with a lot of seams, and you get ready to put your border on, you measure in the middle, and the first time we measured in the middle, I could not believe it measured 188 inches, which is exactly what it would have been with 376 half-inch squares. Yes, that was, and the vertical was 63.5. And I will tell you, it wasn't that way on the top edge and the bottom edge and the sides, but we eased it in like you do when you do. So that way it squared it up. But yeah, the middle was just the right. That was really amazing. So we attached the border strips, and then we handed the panel over to the properties board who had, you know, we had contacted earlier telling what we were doing, so they kind of had an idea of how they were going to build a frame to stretch it onto, and then they also build a frame. So there's a frame behind that the whole thing is stretched on. And then there is the frame around it that I think is a really good effect from our fabric to the wood to enhance it up there. Then I think they used 2 ladders with 2 men, carried it up, and put it on the ledge up there, and there it was. So we finished the construction of it, the fabric construction of it in January of 2023, and they put it up there, they had their work completed up there in February 2023. So that's how long we've had. And I know the first Sunday I was here after it was up, I looked and I made sure that I could tell there were 26 feet. Wanted to make sure we hadn't missed any feet, and there's some of them that are kind of hidden, but it was not, okay, there's 26 feet there. I wasn't worried about the hands, I was worried about making sure we had 26 feet. So that's kind of a summary of how we did it. I could sit and talk for hours about how we did it, but I don't think you need to hear all that other detail. Is there any questions that anybody would like to have, or any comment that you would like to make that we could address that some other people might have questions about or interest in?
I just think it's an amazing leap of faith that you just went for. You know, you didn't grab it out. I mean, it was grabbed out, but not somebody counted everything and figured out. You just
We did it, and that meant there were some cases we had to decide, okay, we run out of this blue, and Nathaniel or whoever was had a blue rug, then blue robe, we had to figure out how we were going to do it. Yeah, this is very much let's get started on it and see what we have to deal with. So if any of you are interested in doing a large project like this, you can get in contact with us and we can tell you things you might want to consider ahead of time that might make it a little easier, but takes away the joy of discovery as you find things. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
I can't remember in the original piece of art if the wine glasses hold exactly the same amount of wine. However, if you look at your table of wine glasses, they are almost identical quantities of wine. And it makes me think, were they ready to do a toast? Did they just pour the wine? Has no one drunk it? Or did you all just decide that's how much wine is going to be in the glass?
I think you've given Pastor Jeff some more research he needs to do. I still haven't seen the salt shaker he's talking about yet, but I know he thinks it's there, and the knife. But and I did notice as he was panning through, you could see some places that we didn't exactly have the right color placement, but that's okay. When you look back here, you don't see those faults, just like from a distance, people don't see our faults either, and we don't see the faults in that. So, any other question or comment? Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for coming today. And as we conclude in here, I just want to encourage you to think big and maybe not think too far ahead if you really want to try something. You know, try things that way. I want you to recognize that we all have resources that we can use and we can share with people to share our love of making, whether it's quilting, whether it's sewing, whether it's embroidery, whatever it is. We need to be prepared for the next pandemic, that we've got things that gives us joy. We do. I think most of the people that I know that are makers and do things like this, we were able to traverse that period of time without getting too discouraged, because we did know that eventually sometime we'd be able to share what we did with them. Now, if you have any friends, yes?
I'm just curious, over the 2 years, how many people total got their hands on this? Would you guess? I know you said, I heard the number of squares.
6 total people that worked on it. Wouldn't you say, Melissa, there were 6 of us? The other people were still, all these quilts here were done by some of the other people with it. There was 4 main ones that did it. We had one person that did pressing and one did the other, and there were 4 of us that basically did the work and did the sewing. Yeah, it wasn't a huge amount of resources that way, but yeah. But it's all part, I mean, we couldn't have done what we did if we hadn't have the other people let us go. And there were a couple of times during that 2-year period of time where they'd come in and say, we need to make pillowcases for Riley, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. And we would stop working on this and work on that. So it wasn't 2 separate groups working. It was trying to accomplish what we needed to do for our mission with that. You know, it really, yeah. Once somebody got to the point that you understood what the color numbers meant, then the main frustration was when you had, and if you don't do a half square triangle, does it go in the upper left or the lower right? That was the main thing about it. It's like, okay, I'll just look at it and figure it out myself, you know. Which way does that one go? But no, I would say there was really no disagreements on anything that we had. It was just in how much longer is it going to take us? That's what we would hear, you know, Pastor Jeff would come in. Yeah, it's like, which Maundy Thursday is this going to be ready for? Well, I don't know. We tried for 2022 and that didn't work, but we did get it for 2023. Yes?
I think you are all stitched together.
All what?
You're all stitched together.
Oh, yes, I think we are. And that's what I would encourage you, if you don't have a stitching buddy or a stitching friend for whatever you like to make, it's great to do that, the encouragement that you have with that. So, I mean, that's one of the things that we want to try to encourage any of you. So if people here want to meet other people, if you want to join our group, that's fine. Now, if you have any friends that need to destash their quilt fabrics, we take quilt fabric donations. All the things you're seeing in here, and the majority of that has been given to us when somebody said, I've got to move someplace and I can't take it with you. We take quilt tops, whether they are finished or not. We take half-finished quilt tops. Some people in the group even like to do that. They like to take a half-finished one, figure out how to finish it. So don't leave those quilt tops under the bed and not being used. We have, or find somebody else to do it, but we have a place that we can give them where they will be loved and they will be cherished. So don't keep something that you think you're never ever going to use. We'd be willing to accept any destashing you have, any fabric donations, any quilts or quilt tops that you would like to find a new home with. Now, as you leave the sanctuary and you'll go down the hall here, take a peek in the kitchen. You'll see where I got the sewing machine set up, where a lot of the sewing was done. You'll pass 2 restrooms, just in case anybody wants to know where the restrooms are. There's 2 of them. Then you'll go down to, and there's going to be some ladies in the hall that'll direct you, and then you'll go and see where our sewing room is. And as we said, we didn't clean up the sewing room for you. It looks just like it was the last time we left it, so it's going to look like a working sewing room. And then across the hall from that, in our discipleship room, there will be a place that we're going to have some home-baked refreshments and drinks. We've got a step-by-step demonstration of the equipment that we used, and if you really want to get a better idea of what the process was, a couple of people will be in there showing you that. And then we have, besides the quilts we have in here, and as Janine said, these aren't all of the quilts that we currently reside here that we haven't given yet. We have more back there just to show you the different things and some other quilted items that we have made. And last of all, you'll see ladies around that have name tags like this. That's the people of our quilt ministry team. And we're going to have a little pad of paper with us. And we would love for you to leave a note for us, or if you have a question, or if you would like for any of us to contact you for anything, please leave that with us, and that will bless us to know that it has been a benefit for you to be here. You have a comment to make, or that you have a question that we could answer for you in the future. And I want to thank you for attending, and go down and see the rest of our exhibit.
I'll show you where I think.